Do you ever get stalked by Bible verses? They follow you around. A friend of mine once had a very bizarre summer where for 6 months, every time he opened his Bible, there was this weird bit in the Old Testament that was about having your ear pierced and hammered onto a door. He started to wonder after a while whether he ought to go out and get an earring. Another person at my last church, she had a heart transplant, and she swore that every time she was asked to do the reading in church, it was that one from Ezekiel that says, "I will take the heart of stone from you and give you a heart of flesh." She used to get quite excited about it. I am stalked by this Bible passage, and I find it really hard, and I find it particularly hard this weekend for reasons which will become clear in a moment. It's one of those Bible passages that seems to come into my life when new things are happening, like when I moved churches. And it was actually the second thing I ever preached on. And I found it hard 25 years ago, 30 years ago, probably. I found it hard 30 years ago, and I find it really hard now. And I expect, as I talk about it, you will find it hard too. It says things that we do not want to hear. So we have to try and decide what we're going to do about that. It's a radical agenda for us as Christians. It is basically saying, if you are going to love God with your whole heart and soul, as we said at the beginning of the service, you've got to somehow or other put that in place in your life. It's not easy. Imagine the scene then. Imagine that it's the next election and Craig Whittaker, our MP, comes to our church to muster support. And we invite the other candidates along as well, because it's only fair. And the other candidates have spoken and they've made lots of promises. Vote for me and life will be wonderful. Vote for me and it'll be easy. The pensions will double. Everything will be brilliant. And then Craig Whittaker stands up and he says, if you're going to vote for me, you're voting to lose your homes and families. You're asking for higher taxes and lower wages. You're deciding in favour of losing everything that you love the most. Vote for me. Well, somebody would be on the phone to the funny farm, wouldn't they, straight off? It's not good, is it? You wouldn't imagine him doing that. I think we can get trapped into thinking that what Jesus is doing here is making the big pitch. He's doing the voting thing. He's saying, here's a weird set of things. If you want to follow me, these are the weird set of things that you must do. And I think if we hear it like that, we think, he's balmy, it's difficult, I'll let James do it, but nobody else has to. But imagine another scene. Perhaps this might help you. It helped me. Imagine that we're on a stormy mountain. It's one of those dark nights and the wind is blowing and the blizzards are up. And you're there with a party of people who've been tasked with getting medicines to a village that's trapped behind the snow. And you've just heard that you can't use the vehicles to get through and you're going to have to go over the mountaintop. And the leader gathers everybody together and he says, I'm not kidding you. This is going to be really hard. Some of you are not going to make it. And I have to tell you that you're going to have to leave a lot of your stuff behind, because if we're going to have to carry this medicine now. We're going to have to carry it ourselves. We can't rely on the trucks or the helicopters because the weather's too bad. It's going to be really hard, and everything that you love may have to be left behind because we have to get this medicine to save these people. So now's the time to make those last phone calls if you want to come and say goodbye. If Jesus is doing that, it's not crazy, is it? All he's doing is saying is that the life of a disciple is not easy. And for those Christians around who've been Christians for a while, you would be able to tell people that. It's not easy. It's not become a Christian and you get an easy life. It's actually a challenge. And the challenges are hard. I mean, I did a funeral this week for a lovely lady. She was called Gladys. She was 102. And she'd been a Christian all her life. But for the last 10 years of her life, she'd lost it. She didn't know anybody. It was hard. And it would have been easy for her to be bitter about that. But in fact, she wasn't, apparently. She just gradually, as it were, slipped away. because I believe that she had faced up to what Jesus is asking us to face up to. The challenges of being his disciple. He is saying, if you face this now, if you face these things, this cost now, then when you face it in reality, you've got no reason to complain. And there are two illustrations, aren't there? He talks about having enough to build. Alan's not here this morning. I was going to ask him. As you know, Alan and Carol are building a house. Well, they are you? Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about building houses is you have to have enough money, don't you, before you start. You have to have enough bricks. It's pointless building half a house isn't any good to anybody, is it? And if you've not got that kind of contingency, people would say, you're bonkers. Why would you build a house and only have the money for the plans or something? You wouldn't do that, would you? You'd sit down and work it all out. That's in theory anyway, isn't it, Carol? But that's the idea, isn't it? We all know that. And Jesus says, what kind of person would want to be my disciple and not have worked out that this might cost me something? It might be hard. Jesus wants us in our faith to sort of budget for what might happen. And then he uses another illustration. He talks about having, the general, doesn't he, coming at an army with twice as many people as him. And he says the general would work out whether it's a good idea to fight these people or whether it'd be better to just say, all right then, whatever you want. Having enough to pay is one of the things that's about. Have you ever had that thing where you go somewhere and you expect to pay by cheque or by card, but they only take cash? When I first moved to Mythenrod, it completely threw me because I'd lived in the centre of Huddersfield. You did everything with a card. And I remember going to the butcher's once and paying with a cheque. Can you imagine? It was really embarrassing. £3 of sausages and the vicar's there signing a cheque. Is it all right? Because he didn't have a machine. Oh, no. Jesus wants us to carry around the right change. He wants us to carry the right amount. He wants us to be prepared, as it were, with our faith to say, well, I might have to do this someday, so I'm ready for this. So when it does happen, whatever it is, whenever that big thing comes that Jesus asks you to do, you can say, yeah, I know about this. I thought this might come. Here I am again. I'm ready to pay. We do need to be a bit careful with this passage because there is something in it that happens in the Bible which you need to take hold of. And that is that Jesus uses extreme language to get his point across. And I don't want to argue away what he's saying, but you do need to be a bit careful. Because just like I might say, I hate cabbage and I love broccoli. And it doesn't mean to say that when I see a cabbage, I throw it out the window. And when I see broccoli, I give it a big embrace and kiss it. It's extreme language. And there's a bit of that in what Jesus is doing. But I don't think we can get around this passage that way. I think we have to face what he's saying, because what comes next is shocking. It is so shocking that my mum last night, at my dad's 80th birthday party, said, can you believe what your dad's preaching on tomorrow? He's going to tell us all we've to hate our relatives. Because that's what it says. He says, whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, cannot be my disciple. Hate your relatives. Now, some of you are already thinking, yes. That's not quite the reaction you're supposed to have. These are nice people, really. Or if they're not nice, you've still got to love them. But God, why does Jesus hit on this one first? Why is it the family? Well, I think the family is where the rubber hits the road. And that's why in the early church there's a big emphasis on being single. Because if you're single, allegedly, it's not true, but if you're single, it's supposedly easy. You don't have all these family commitment things. I don't think that quite works. But basically, it's where our faith hits the road. It's what we do about our kids, or what we do about our parents, or what we do about our brothers and sisters, and all those family things. Whether we choose to do this family thing, or whether we choose to do what God wants us to do. And be careful, because it's not what the church wants you to do that's the thing. It's what God wants you to do that's the thing. Because I got caught out with that a few times. When I went to theological college, Ben went last weekend, one of the things I fell into, which I've warned him about, is I will leave my family and I will go and study because it is the Lord's work. So Catherine's in hospital and I'm getting somebody in to look after our 18-month-year-old for a few days for my shame. because I couldn't leave my work because it was too important. Rubbish. It's not about that. It's about God first, family second, church 10th, probably. Okay? It's easy to obey God on our own, but not so easy when we have other people. What Jesus is saying is, when it comes to the crunch, would you serve me or would you serve your family first? He may not ask, but if he does, we've got to have worked it out. We've got to decide that that's the priority we're going to make. Not easy, that first one then. Hate your relatives. And he tacks on the end of it, and yourself. Life itself, he says. You've got to hate your own life. Jesus wants me to put my own life second to serving God. It sounds almost easier than the first demand, but let's think about this. What about following Jesus is more important than my comfort? So that when I was visiting in the urban area in which I worked and being presented with the most disgusting tea you have ever seen, in the most filthy cup you have ever seen, sat on the most filthy chair you've ever sat on, so that things were crawling across the floor, this meant a lot to me. My life was not as important as following Jesus. Following Jesus is more important than my safety. Of course you make safe choices in your life, but sometimes you cannot be safe in order to follow Jesus. Many Christians will vow to that across the world. Sometimes you just cannot be safe. Following Jesus is more important than my needs. I can't remember if I told you this joke before. You've probably heard it. You know the one about the guy, there's an awful accident. He's fallen off a cliff. He's hanging onto the cliff edge. He's got his hands on the cliff. He's hanging on by one hand, and he's a Christian, so he says to God, Lord, help me. And the clouds open, and a voice comes from the sky, and the voice says, just let go and I'll catch you. And there's a long pause, and then the man says, is there anybody else up there? Jesus wants us to trust him with our lives. So that for my dad, he won't mind me saying this because you'll not see him for a bit now. For my dad, he's got prostate cancer. He thinks he might die sometime. He's not worried about it. Not much. Because he says he's dealt with this before. He's thought it through before. His Christian faith is based on the fact that he's thought through when his time is there, his time is there. His safety is not as important to him as it is to us. We want him to worry about it more, but he doesn't. Because he's dealt with this. His life is not as important as following Jesus. So if you read the book of Acts, and I recommend it's a fabulous story, once the disciples had learned to hate their own life, they were unstoppable. Paul and Silas, they're in prison, they're chained up, it's dark, and the jailer is woken up by what? Them singing hymns and praising God. How irritating is that? They wanted them to be miserable, but they wouldn't be miserable because they'd realized that putting Jesus first meant that they didn't need to worry about their lives. Some of you may, this is for the younger folk, some of you may have read a book called V for Vendetta. Has anybody read it? Or seen the film? Yeah, some people. My family watch these kind of films. It's a horrible film, but a really good film, but it's a bit horrible. But there's a bit in the film where the lead character makes one of the other characters think that she's about to die. And she faces it with courage. And when she faces it with courage, and she's really angry with him, because it's not true, she's not going to die. But he says to her, now you have faced your death. Now you know that you can die with courage. You need never be afraid of it. And there's something of that in what Jesus is wanting us to do. And it's a deep thing. Of once we've faced our fear of death, nothing else can hurt us. Nothing can hurt us. And we know we will die in the love of Jesus. And that's why the picture in baptism is that when you're baptized, you kind of die, really. And then you're brought to life again. I once went to a funeral of one of my students. He happened to be a student who was aged about 75. And the vicar at this very Catholic church, it really threw me. It was one of those kind of places with lots of incense, lots of ceremony. But he started the service by saying the most extraordinary thing. He said, Bob died 75 years ago. And you can imagine the congregation went, what? Because he said in baptism he died to Christ and came to life again. And now he lives forever. with his Saviour. I haven't had the guts to do that yet, but wouldn't that be an amazing thing to say? So the tail end of this passage really catches us out, because you think that's enough to challenge us with. But then he says, so therefore none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. Well, that's a bit easy after life and family. But what happens if God leads you to a life of poverty and deprivation? We always assume as Christians that life's going to get better and better and better and lovelier and lovelier and lovelier. But maybe God might lead you to have a difficult life. Ooh, there's a surprise. He might lead you to have a life where you don't have money, where you do have to struggle. People often ask me when someone dies, how much did they leave? And the answer is always, everything. Nobody takes anything with them. And yet, we think our possessions give us immortality. So much of what we regard as essential is really not essential. Again, because Ben's here, I need to give him all these talks. When I went to theological college, I used to come home and say, I bought a book. It was £30. It was a bargain. And Catherine would say, do you need it? And I would say, yes. And she would say, will you die without it? And the answer was no. So she would say, what you need to say is you want it, not that you need it. And it's important for us that we do that kind of thing. And this is a fact, not a command. Unless we let loose of our grip on our possessions, then we will be resentful if God asks us to give. Of course we will. Because we'll say, we need this stuff. It keeps us warm and cozy. And we will be jealous of what other people have. Why have they got this stuff and I haven't got this stuff? And we will spend all our time in the world trying to get the things to spend in the world instead of getting on with a job in hand. Living the life that God has called us to. And nothing will ever get done. Now, if you're like me in a sermon like this, you've got to the point, and Ron, we're about to do the video, so I'm just warning you to get ready. Are you ready? There's a video here that's just a short thing to challenge you about what I would do at this point. I would say, but. Let's see what this man says about buts.
Suggest that possibly you have at least one big butt as well. Yeah, you like that? Hurts a little, huh? Let me tell you something. Let me just tell you something, okay? Everybody we know has a big butt. And more often than not, it's the thing that actually gets in the way of us living a consistent life for Jesus. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to expound a little bit, okay? See if you can recognize some of these butts. But I have to work more. But my favorite TV show is on. But my kids have practice. But I got to tweak something. But it's such a beautiful day. But I'm just not in the mood. But I deserve a break today. You see, everything kind of interferes with my life of just living an authentic life for God, okay? And more often than not, it always has something to do with some sort of butt, okay? Even the littlest of butt can distract me. It really can. The littlest butt can make me think, I'm not going to pray today. I'm not going to think about it today. I'm not going to deny myself. I'm not going to read the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Whatever God asks me to do, I seem to have a butt for it and get away, okay? And the most horrendously big butt of all time is the butt that gets in the way of me just hanging out with God and reading His Word. It's true. Think about it. All the times you're about to open that, and all of a sudden a big giant butt gets in the way. A butt. Much like one of these. But I got a farm bill, but I'm tired, but the game's over, but I read last Tuesday, but I gotta check Facebook, but I don't like Leviticus, but it's too hot in here, but I just don't like books, but I don't understand it, but it's boring. But what does that have to do with me in the 21st century? Those are some ugly butts, people. Just call them what they are, ugly. Ugly butts. Okay? And there's a lot more to them, sad but true. Here's a list, although not exhaustive, of some of the most popular butts known to mankind. But I don't have enough money yet. But others will think that I'm a nerd if I carry the Bible. But they won't like me if I talk about Jesus. But I don't know if God will do what I ask. But I just can't get motivated. But I'm afraid. But I don't have all the answers. But the small group is the same night as Monday Night Football. But can't I just let my life speak for itself? But I'm not happy. That's not my gift. That's the pastor's job. But I don't know how to pray. But I can't believe that. But I don't know where to start. But everybody else is having fun. Butts abound, friend. Butt. Here a butt, there a butt, everywhere a butt. Okay? And the most overused butt of all time, but I just don't have enough time. Really? Oh, come on. We have a lot of butts. God has given us a real simple word. okay? If we learn it and we share it and we teach it and we live by it, then see, God gets glorified, people benefit, and then we get blessed. That's why we do what we do. That's the why behind the but, okay? And ultimately, that's the whole point I'm trying to make here, my fellow butt lovers, is if your butt is bigger than your why, then your butt's too big. Okay, it's time to, metaphorically speaking, snap into a Slim Jim. Okay, let's slap on some spiritual shape-ups and hit the road a little bit so we can just manage the butts a little bit. That's all we're trying to do. That's what we're talking about. Let's minimize the excuses. Let's shrink the butts. Shrink the butts. Say it with me. Shrink the butts. That's what we need to do. And you and I can do that together. We can conquer this. You and I can do it if we start today, okay? I know we can. Let's just do it. No ifs, ands, or